how's it going? Thanks for coming by again. Again, thank you everyone who's come by and watched the last few videos and people who commented, some new people to the channel, give me some feedback. Really good stuff and good things to hear so I could improve going forward. Now, I am one subscriber away from 30, which I still want to get to within a week or so. So if anyone's coming by and just watching the video, please consider staying and subscribing, and if you like what you're seeing, I'll be able to pump out a lot more content. Now, today we're going to be talking about Scott Stevens and his career and some of the things that he did in his career. And I think when people say the name Scott Stevens, they think of the hits and everything, and so we'll get into that in a minute. So, start with just some NHL news that I forgot to talk about yesterday and some stuff today. Alright, some signings. Dominic Cahoon goes and signs a one-year deal with the Edmonton Oilers. He played for Pittsburgh Penguins and the Buffalo Sabres last year. Goes over to them to help them offensively. Anthony Mantha got re-signed to a 4-year, $22.8 million contract with the Red Wings. Really good signing. Good thing that they kept him around. Good cornerstone piece to build around, especially up the middle. And for those young guys, just to have some veteran presence to look up at, even though he is young himself. And over in Carolina, Warren Foegele signs a one-year extension with the Carolina Hurricanes. And today, more from signings was Ryan Pulock signs a 2-year contract extension with the New York Islanders. Really like him. He's got a really hard shot. He's a good piece to that Islanders back end. And the last piece before we get into everything is that Ben Bishop and Tyler Seguin of the Stars both need 5 months of recovery for 2 separate surgeries. And that looks like they're probably going to miss the start of a season. However long that season is going to be, we don't know. We'll get right into Scott Stevens, a really interesting guy, a really interesting person and personality that was in the game, and an absolute force. Now, so he was drafted into the OHL to his hometown Kingston Frontenacs, and he played there, and ultimately he got drafted 5th overall by the Washington Capitals in 1982. Now, he finished out his time with the Kingston Frontenacs, but he did make the NHL as an 18-year-old. And it was mostly because there was injuries on the Washington Capitals at that time, especially on their back end. And he, being an 18-year-old, I'm sure their plan wasn't to bring him in right away, but that's exactly what they did. And he did succeed. He never looked back at that point, and he never, ever played in his career a single AHL game. So he never got sent down to the minors for conditioning or anything like that. He scored his very first NHL goal on his first shot, which is very impressive considering he was a defenseman and not like an offensive defenseman, but more of a defensive one. And he was definitely a big surprise to be the person to score on their first NHL shot. And he scored 25 points in his rookie season as an 18-year-old again, and he made the all-rookie team. Now, Scott Stevens spent the first 8 years of his career with the Washington Capitals, and when it came time for them to renegotiate a contract, and after those 8 years, the New Jersey Devils could not afford what another team offered. So what happened was the St. Louis Blues came around and they offer sheeted Scott Stevens. So he was a restricted free agent, but they were able to come in and put an offer in, and they had a certain amount of time to respond and match the offer, which they couldn't, so they ended up letting Stevens go to the St. Louis Blues. And that compensation was 2 first-round picks and $100,000 cash as compensation for Scott Stevens. Now, so Stevens only lasted 1 season in St. Louis. There was a big fiasco that happened and disputes between an arbitrator, which ultimately made Stevens a compensation piece to the New Jersey Devils. And that's where, even though the Blues wanted him, it became that he had to go over to the Devils. And he actually didn't want to report to Devils camp because at that time the Devils weren't that great. They hadn't won their Stanley Cups yet because he was a part of that, right? In his first playoff run with the New Jersey Devils, his first real infamous hit happened. It was in their Stanley Cup final game against the Detroit Red Wings, which they did end up sweeping. Slava Kozlov was knocked out and like knocked out cold by a Stevens hit. If you've seen the clip of the hit, it's a really nasty hit, and today it definitely would have been a very hefty suspension, and it did result in Kozlov having a concussion. And so after that complete sweep of the Red Wings, obviously New Jersey Devils win their first Stanley Cup in franchise history, and they also make history the next season, being the first team in 26 years to win the Stanley Cup and immediately the next season fail to make the playoffs. The next time the Devils won the Stanley Cup was in 2000, and they blew their way through the first two rounds, but they ended up meeting their heavy rivals in the Philadelphia Flyers, and this was what we talked about in the last video about Eric Lindros. This was where the Lindros hit happened, and Scott Stevens destroyed Eric Lindros. And again, Lindros, you could say he was coming across looking at his stick, looking at the puck, not paying attention to what was in front of him, but it was still a blindside check nonetheless. He was definitely aiming for his head and definitely trying to get him out of the game. So that year, they went to the Stanley Cup Final, and they had to play against the Dallas Stars. The Dallas Stars just previously won their first Stanley Cup in franchise history against the Buffalo Sabres, and so they were back for a second year in a row trying to defend their title. And what ended up happening, if everyone remembers that, Jason Arnott ended up scoring the game-winning goal on Ed Belfour, and Scott Stevens ended up getting the winning assist to secure the Stanley Cup for the New Jersey Devils. So second Stanley Cup in his tenure. And again, more devastating hits from him throughout those years, where you could just look up a highlight reel of him of what he did and how vicious his hits were. And not that every single one of them were dirty, it's that he had just power behind him. He was like a freight train. And in 2003, the Devils returned to the Stanley Cup Final, and this time their opponent was the Anaheim Ducks. And the first thing that came to mind when you think Anaheim Ducks and them is probably Paul Kariya. Now, this hit changed Paul Kariya's life, and that's not just looking at like his career stats afterwards and saying like, oh, he dropped off. Paul Kariya. So we'll start with what just happened first. Obviously, Kariya had a great story in this game of he got blindsided and Stevens knocked him right out, gave him a concussion. He had to leave, came back somehow because there wasn't concussion protocol, or at least concussion protocol how there is today. Kariya came back, he scored, Ducks forced a Game 7, ultimately lost, and so what happened when I say that this changed Kariya's life, Paul Kariya disappeared from the face of the NHL when he retired. He disappeared completely, and no one knew where he was, aside from his family. But they wanted to interview him, the NHL. They wanted to know what his life was like, and he did come and talk about how much his concussions, especially that one, changed his life. And I know he had another one when he was playing with the Blues later on in his career, but that was the one that really changed him and changed his personality. And now he has post-concussion syndrome, and this kind of falls into maybe CTE possibly, but obviously that's not diagnosable until after someone's deceased. The season coming up was the lockout season in 2004-2005, and after the 2005 lockout, that's when Scott Stevens ultimately retired. So he didn't have an overly long career, but he was an active player for a long time. And I mean, like 15 years, I believe, is a long career, but you'd think it could have been longer, and it was also because he got post-concussion syndrome himself from taking a slap shot to the head, so that definitely played a part in shortening his career. Now, I just want to talk quickly about like what I think the good and the bad side of this is. And I know I'm talking from someone who never really appreciated seeing him play in his prime or anything like that, but I don't think there's any players today in the league that exist like how Scott Stevens was. And maybe I could think the closest correlation was Dustin Byfuglien, but even that, I don't think they're even close. I think Stevens is on his own level. So I'd say like the good reason to have Stevens, so the good part would be he got those 3 Stanley Cups, and he was a huge reason why. So he was the guy that would go out there and he would rack up penalty minutes, even if penalties, maybe it wasn't the best that he was in the box all the time, but he could still go out there and set the tone, and even if he had to serve the penalty minutes, the New Jersey Devils had guys like Niedermayer and Danico they had guys that can go out there and still take over the spot without giving up goals or anything like that. That's how the Devils were. Now, the cons obviously are his reputation and the fallout for the rest of his life, because the players that came forward and now have all these problems, like Eric Lindros, who was hit multiple times by him, and Paul Correa, and just guys who suffered the consequences of dirty hits. Now, so he was in a different era, though. I think he would be getting a lot more backlash if he was in today's NHL. I think he would be shunned. I don't see how anyone would look at him as an effective player in today's NHL. If he was able to keep his hits clean, or relatively clean, and didn't purposely go for the head, because I know there are clips, and they've broke down clips before, of there was intent, and he said there was times where he was trying to go headhunting. He was trying to injure a guy and get him out of the game. Now, however you look at that, I don't think you should be playing the game to injure someone, because these people are fathers. These people are trying to make a living. And I know you're trying to battle it out for hockey wins, and you're trying to win a Stanley Cup if you're in the final against each other, but still, you're not going out there trying to turn some guy's head into mush. So, Scott Stevens, I think he will always have that, like, look both ways reputation when you hear his name. He is definitely going to go down as probably one of the most feared players in NHL history. Of, if you ask players who they feared the most when they were on the ice, it was a lot of the times they would say it's Scott Stevens, just because you never knew when he was going to decide he was going to knock you down, or when he was going to knock your lights out. Alright, I hope you enjoyed that, a career of Scott Stevens. Comment down below what you think about him, if you watched him play, if he was on your team, or if you had experience watching him be dirty or contribute in different ways. Let me know down below what you guys think of him. And don't forget to like and subscribe. I check every comment. I'm going to reply to every comment. It means a lot to me, all the feedback. So I will see you in the next video. I hope you enjoy your night, and we'll see you later.